So firstly, I'll introduce myself. I'm Susan Hillier. I'm the Dean for Research at the University of South Australia. We're delighted with this initiative and thank the opportunity to continue to present. Then I would like to acknowledge that we meet on the country of the Kaurna people, certainly where we are presenting. We are in the country, the Kaurna people's country. So wherever you are, I hope that you take this moment to acknowledge and pay tribute to the people who have custodianship of your lands. We recognise the Aboriginal people's spiritual connection to the land and recognise that this connection has extended into the past, is current and will extend into the future. So finally, my job is to present our speaker for today, Professor Lorimer Moseley. I have got his CV up here and I could read it out to you and we would take up more than half an hour. But suffice to say, I am delighted to introduce Lorimer. He is a fabulous colleague and friend for all of us at UniSA here who work in the allied health space. Lorimer studied initially as a physio. His PhD was in pain management at University of Sydney, and then he held positions at University of Queensland and Oxford University. He has a Doctor of Science as well as a PhD, lots of different fellowships. He is an officer of the Order of Australia. And importantly for this talk, he is inaugural chair of physio and professor of clinical neurosciences at UniSA. In particular, he's going to talk about his research in chronic pain, which is international in its impact, changing the way we think about pain and changing the way clinicians and people with pain think about the pain. So without any further commentary from me, I'll hand you over to Lorimer. He will talk for the double session today, so we'll have questions at the end. Because our second speaker, John Arnold, is very busy having a baby. Well, his wife's actually having the baby, but he's the support person. So Lorimer will cover off on John's work as well. So over to you, Lorimer.
Thanks, Susan. Hi, everyone. It's just another one of those weird Zoom things, right? There could be absolutely no one there, but hello to anyone who is. That was almost a miracle, wasn't it, that John Arnold was having a baby? But it is a miracle. They're always a miracle. So the brief that I've got for this, and I've been to a couple of these, is to really provide an overview of the work that we're doing in impact in the chronic pain space, and I guess the capabilities that I see that we have. So we've got a reasonably large group of researchers dedicated to understanding persistent pain. And the role of, I guess, in particular, the role of non-pharmacological, non-device interventions. And we do lots of things. So what I want to do is really just give you an idea of the research framework that is driving the work that we do in impact on pain and across our 4 challenges. Impact stands for innovation, implementation, and clinical translation in health. And we're targeting 4 what we would call grand challenges. Persistent pain is one of them, stroke recovery, persistent breathlessness, and the rural metro health divide. So I'm just going to tell you about what we're doing in persistent pain, but the research framework applies across all 4 of our grand challenges. So I'm really hoping I didn't go, yeah, I'm still audible, I think. So under our group, we have 2 themes sitting under the challenge, and one is musculoskeletal theme, and that's where John Arnold is driving that research. And as we said, he's in the middle of a miracle. And then we have osteoarthritis dedicated pain theme being driven by Professor Tasha Stanton. And this is how we try and work everything in what we do in impact. So I'm going to tell you that structure and really just give you an indication of the sort of research we've done, and then my time will be up, I imagine. So if you imagine a never-ending circle of research, innovation, clinical translation, implementation, we're going to start for this talk up at the section of that circle where we're identifying what are the problems out there. And we'd like to call them real world problems. And in order for us to understand those, we work quite closely with consumers and clinicians. What's happening for you. We then, when we identify those problems, we try and find solutions to them, and we do that through experiments. If we find a solution that seems to be good, we test it in a clinical study. And if the clinical studies or up to clinical trials tell us, yeah, this is good, then we dedicate time and effort to implement it. So we have implementation projects so that the discoveries get straight into the practice or into the community. And it's through that last process where we start identifying new problems. So I'll talk about that more specifically with reference to what we do. So in this first stage of identifying real world problems, we have a really active community of people. Oh, that's a bad thing to have happen, isn't it? An active community of people who are at the coalface. So some of that is through a thing called Pain Revolution, which is an interdisciplinary, inter-sector organisation of people, including consumers and clinicians. We have a local pain educator program where we're dealing directly with clinicians who are really facing the problems of how do we get contemporary science into the minds and hearts of clinicians and consumers. And then we work with industry there. AIA is an example of an industry player, and we might do an implementation project where half the target is to understand what's the problem that you're having implementing this sort of work. Then we go on to undertaking experiments to find new solutions, and there's a whole range of experiments that we undertake, and broadly speaking, we can divide them into research that looks at research that's already published. So that's systematic reviews and meta-analyses and some other types of analyses, so secondary analysis. And here's just some examples of the sort of stuff we do. So we've got systematic reviews with meta-analysis, without meta-analysis. Here's an example of the sort of areas that our research group is interested in. So that top one there, so this is a paper just out this week or last week, looking at the social determinants of health and low back pain outcomes. That's being driven by Karen. Down the bottom, just to give you a feel for the diversity within our group, all trying to look at, well, what is the problem and how can we test new solutions. Down the bottom there is an example of some interesting work Felicity Braithwaite's been doing on working out how can we blind clinicians to the idea that they're delivering a dry needling intervention or an acupuncture intervention. In the middle there, from the British Journal of Anaesthesia, was a project led by Kerwin Talbot, challenging an assumption in the pain field that you can differentiate the intensity of your pain and how horrible it is. And she did a wonderful systematic review looking at that. So they're examples of the systematic review capability and interests that we have. We also do systems neuroscience. So systems neuroscience means we are interested in the nervous system's behaviour. Our group doesn't do anything on particular cells or particular body parts, and we don't do anything on non-human animals. We can divide those sort of systems neuroscience or systems studies into behavioural studies, and here's an example of some of those behavioural studies. At the top there, where we're looking at behavioural tests as a marker of how the brain is representing the body. The implicit motor imagery performance study uses reaction time and accuracy on simple tasks. That's a behavioural study. And the one down the bottom, we deliver noxious stimuli to people in different paradigms to see if, for example, on this study, whether we can classically condition a lowering of pain threshold. So they're the sort of experiments that we would call behavioural studies. We also do neurophysiology. So often it goes from behavioural, and if something looks interesting, we then go the next step to try to understand the neurophysiology of that. How is the nervous system making this happen? Examples of that are using brain activity, that's the bottom one there, assessing muscle activity. This is a series of studies looking at the area of space around you that you protect. And we can test that by stimulating a blink reflex when your hand is in different positions. And this one up here, we use reaction time and a behavioural task looking at the activation of muscles. So EMG, EEG, and Erica Wilkinson in our group is now looking at ECG, so looking at cardiac activity as a marker of how you're representing your own body. That's probably where our capabilities that will be relevant to this, the other researchers out there, and that is in our human recording capability. So we do, as I said, EEG, ECG and EMG, so brain, cardiac and skeletal muscle recordings. We have a range of methods with which to hurt people, to deliver noxious stimuli. So we use electrical stimuli that are delivered through electrodes placed on the skin. We have other techniques where we put the electrode just into the skin, which is a really precise way of activating danger detectors or nociceptors. We have thermal stimuli that go very hot or very cold, and we have laser stimuli which deliver a very short laser stimulus to the skin somewhere. All of those things at the right intensity make you hurt. And then we can evaluate your response to that, both how it feels and what it does to your nervous system, for example, your brain. We also have capability, and this is John Arnold's work, of integrating data from wearables, of very sophisticated three-dimensional motion analysis. And that work that John's leading is really relevant to hip and knee osteoarthritic pain and trying to predict outcomes of surgery or shift people off surgical pathways. The last section on this systems research we do are more cognitive studies or survey-based studies. And again, this is just an example of those things. We do work using Delphi surveys. We do work using quantitative surveys, and we do other cognitive tests, which really are quite similar to behavioural tests, only we only ask questions, so it's verbal report. So they're the sort of things that we do to try and find new solutions. And when those experiments tell us, yeah, this might be good, then we conduct some sort of clinical study on it. And we have a range of clinical trial designs that we use. So at the top there, it's an example of a replicated single case series. And in those designs, we're very interested in looking at the effect of an intervention controlled for time, but not necessarily a randomized controlled trial. And they're great when you can't access many numbers, or you're not prepared yet to invest in the very expensive $1 million randomized controlled trial. Another way we might go around that is an example here from Emma Caron's work, where she developed a short, brief intervention. And our first test of that was through what we call a virtual patient scenario, where we ask people who are not patients to imagine they are patients. And there's some interesting work around that suggests that it provides a really nice predictor of what a patient will probably do. It's a surprisingly effective way of again, undertaking a research study that is feasible before you do all the work to do a big fat randomized controlled trial. However, we do those. So here's an example of this. This is a $1.2 million randomized controlled trial that we finished in collaboration with people in Sydney and published late last year. So we do clinical studies across the gamut of, expense and comprehensiveness in their answer. Then if we've got an intervention or a solution that the experiment said was good, the clinical study said were good, we want to implement it. And we have some implementation projects going at the moment. And you might recognize this slide as effectively a flip from the first one, but we aim to implement these things again through our networks with Pain Revolution, the local pain educator program, through our industry partnerships, through PHNs, through departments of health. And again, this is an implementation pathway, but hopefully you can see that brings us right back to that process of identifying real world problems. that are to be solved. So there's the circle in its entirety. And just to give you another, I guess, just a reminder of the sort of work that we're doing in Impact is all about taking things from identifying the problem to finding a solution and implementing it. But we never stop that journey because we're always implementing, and therefore we're always identifying new problems. That, Susan, is the end of my 15 minutes and 45 seconds that I think I was allocated. That's it.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, Lorimer. So now we'll open it up to questions. So for those of you who are familiar with the process, there's the Q&A box that you can tick and you can type your question in directly. And I'll relay that question and Lorimer will hazard an answer. No open questions at the moment. So I'll ask a question, Lorimer, just to kind of kickstart. We've discussed a lot, you know, what your work has revealed about chronic pain. What's the thing that surprised you the most in your work, working with people with chronic pain? I'd like to start off with an easy one.
Yeah, I think my answer to that, without having any prep time, would be the vast variability in response and possibility. I think, and I don't know if that's confined to the research that I've done or whether that's a combination of the research and the clinical work that I do. I've had clinical experiences that have blown my mind from really challenging patients with whom I just can't help them. And I'm surprised that I can't, right up to the other end of really challenging patients who recover really quickly after decades of problems, almost against all reason. And then taking those things into the lab and trying to devise experiments to understand that. I've been really surprised by some of those results. And I think I get most surprised when the discoveries happen, to be honest. You know, a lot of what any research group does, I expect, is following a process, but every now and then something unexpected happens and it's really exciting or really demoralizing. But even the demoralizing stuff is exciting, I reckon. I don't know what you think, but it can be exciting because you just did not see it coming.
Great. Now, any more questions coming through? I'm just wondering if people are not familiar with the Q&A box down the bottom as opposed to the chat function, because I've got the participant list up and I can see that you're all a very questioning bunch. So Mark Hutchinson has asked, where does the farm industry fit into the translational work?
Thanks, Mark. Great to have you
farm,
here, Mark.
Not the F farm, the PH farm.
Yeah, well, I find the first one very easy to answer, the problem of pain among farmers. But the pharmaceutical stuff, yeah, Mark and I have discussed this at great length. I think pharma has a really important role to play in translational pain research. We just don't, at the moment, do the sort of experiments where that role is really obvious. But we do collaborate with those people who do, including you, which is one of my favourite collaborations. But if I'm allowed to do this, Susan, I expect that a question like this from a person like Mark would have an answer waiting. Can we ask Mark what he would say?
I'm not sure that they can talk when they're in audience land.
Oh, can they not? Because I always get so much out of...
Yeah, I can give it permission.
Okay, thanks, Tamara.
Great. Okay, Mark, you're about to tell us where you think it can fit into this, or into the translational work of us, or maybe of the wider community.
Gary Loz.
Hey.
Mate, I guess the thing beautiful talk.
Thanks.
The piece that I would say is the fact that we are talking and there are bits of us that are talking, this is where the Biomed City falls. This is why we need Biomed City to act as a centralised point, so it's Team SA talking, not just little old Mark or Big Loz talking.
Well, you can't believe you talked about yourself there as both little and old. I think last time I heard you're about 12, right? No, I think that's a great point, Mark. And I guess, that's where we started that sort of journey with the Pain Adelaide thing.
Yeah.
That COVID scuppered a little bit, I guess, but we need to reignite that, right?
Yeah, so I think that's where this is absolutely critical, that we then have the greater than the sum of its parts contributions as an interface for industry, so that then we all Adelaide becomes, SA becomes the best place to do translational impactful pain research.
Mm. This is a great conversation to have because, as you all know, the South Australian Productivity Commission are currently in a draft report phase for the health and medical research in South Australia. And there's been a few roundtables about exactly these issues, about this, when collaboration is important for quality research, and what are the facilitators to these sorts of collaborations. And obviously precinct is a possibility. So both of you here, what would you say, what are the attributes of a precinct that would facilitate meaningful quality collaborations?
You want to go first on that, Mark? You're really hot on this sort of stuff and a real leader in this way. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Susan, so I would ask the question this way: what has Adelaide got that Boston doesn't have, that Sydney doesn't have, and that London doesn't have? And in all reality, it's people like Lorimer who can work within 20 minutes of each other. And so therefore, we don't, I hate to say it, we probably don't need a big fancy new building. We need to have the support for the people to work collaboratively together as a unit to drive that forward, which then will generate so much funds that the building will come from that, rather than building it and hoping that they'll come.
So I love your capacity to both have a vision and articulate it, Mark. I also wonder if when you asked the question, Susan, about what does a precinct mean, it certainly feels like this sort of regular interface is really important. And I guess the next step would be, and I always think that it's time in each other's space in this group. And I guess it's up to that. I would see that as a real possibility if the precinct could be the facilitator of that and could be an institution agnostic facilitator of that. And possibly even sector agnostic. And I don't know if Biomed Precinct satisfies that or not. Almost like the connector.
Yeah. I think there's some good food for thought there. There's another question that's popped up in the Q&A box from Leonie Siegel, who asks, where does early life adversity like child abuse and neglect fit in? Might it be one of the factors that explains the high variability in patient response, but maybe also provides opportunity for other types of interventions? So this probably speaks to some of the social determinants of health work that you've done as well, Loz.
Yeah, well, that we're pretty early on in that journey, and that's I've got to give Emma Karen all credit for her drive and commitment to that. And I think that's going to be a high yield direction. It's remarkable how little social determinants of health has penetrated the pain world. It's remarkable. But to your question, Leonie, and thanks for it. And I'm reminded of I think our most recent email conversation. The literature is really inconclusive about the magnitude of the impact of early childhood trauma on likelihood of getting pain and and likelihood of recovering from it. But it seems pretty conclusive that there is an impact. And from a theoretical perspective, it would make sense. The system learns very quickly, and there's good evidence of one episode learning, and there's good evidence of one episode learning in other fields, such as most obviously fear, but also in pain. And some of the work that we're doing around this thing called the imprecision hypothesis of pain is even more relevant, because it's applying a broadly defined classical conditioning lens to understanding how the nervous system adapts and how it can adapt quickly. And that's been informed a lot by taste aversion research, where there's clear evidence of one taste, one exposure to an ingested thing that tastes horrible means that you don't eat it ever again. And that principle would make sense for all the other protective feelings that we have. And I would describe pain as a protective feeling that is open to very sophisticated and rapid upregulations and adaptations. So I think the easiest answer to your question is, I don't know. It may contribute to some of that heterogeneity, that variability in responses that people have. But I mean, we get massive variability within individuals in exactly the same lab within a 45-minute session. The same stimulus intensity can give them a pain of 5 out of 10 and go unnoticed. And that's with exactly the same energy being delivered at the cellular level. So and this is why I think we need to actually let go of concepts like pain thresholds, because they just don't, the system doesn't seem to really work like that from my perspective. I'd be interested actually, Mark, if you're still there, in your perspective on that. And I think we might have spoken about that, but reframing pain as in the terms of a component of an online predictive, protective network, then early childhood trauma should theoretically shift the sensitivity and response profile of that system.
So there's two more little questions in the question and answer, Lorimer. The first one is, have you investigated cannabinoids? I think I know the answer in the lab is no.
That's correct. No, we have not.
And
we're part of teams that investigate it using systematic review and meta-analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other question is from Phil Weinstein. Has the global burden of pain increased or decreased in the last decade or so? And are there society-level drivers to address?
Yeah, the burden of pain has increased. The relative burden of pain has increased. The burden of back pain has slightly decreased, I think, but not measurably. And the contemporary models of pain, and Phil, I reckon you'd be all over this, clearly implicate societal factors and relationship factors, and Emma's work on social determinants demonstrate that they're important. But we really are a long way from understanding how we can intervene to reduce their impact. And in part, we're a long way from that because we don't actually understand how their impact has its effect. Again, we've got lovely theoretical models, and contemporary pain science would predict that the COVID crisis, for example, should change the likelihood of pain, but it also would say that it will change it in a different direction for different individuals. And therein lies the fearful and wonderful complexity of the human, I guess.
Well, that brings us to the end of the session. Thank you so much, Lorimer. Thanks to all the participants.
Thanks, Mark.
And thanks, Mark. Thanks, Tamara. Thanks, Adelaide MedCity and John Beltrami for the opportunity. Please do take the opportunity to get in touch with Lorimer. I can guarantee he is very, very open to communications and is always up for a good chat and a vigorous debate. So please keep the conversation going, and we look forward to people coming next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.